Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the first NCA, for the first webinar of NCA's new webinar series. I want to start off by thanking our sponsor for today's webinar, D&D Technologies. We are very excited to be joined by Nicole Hughes and Dr. Julie Gilchrist, who will contribute to today's discussion on the revised statement from the American Academy of Pediatrics on the prevention of drowning. Later we will be joined by Helene Holstein, the social media community manager at the American Academy of Pediatrics, who will discuss next week's Drowning Prevention Day of Action. As we go through today's discussion, audience members are encouraged to submit questions using the question and answer function in your toolbar. After our presenters have concluded, we will use any remaining time to answer any submitted questions. I will be monitoring the submitted questions throughout the webinar and populate those at the end. I would now like to introduce Nicole Hughes. Nicole is mom to Lily, age 10, Reese, age 6, Levi, forever age 3, and Willow, due May 2019. She is a literacy coach, a Girl Scout troop manager, and a terrible cook. She and her husband Jonathan Hughes lost their son Levi in June 2018 when he somehow slipped out of their beach house unnoticed and drowned. Nicole has become an advocate for water safety and is desperate to spread the awareness she wishes she had known. Nicole, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm so sorry. There was a little bit of echoing, so hopefully that is fixed. Now, thank you so much, Adam. I really appreciate it, and I'm really grateful for this opportunity. That, of course, I wish I didn't have, but I am really truly grateful. So thank you so much for this. So yes, so I have a few pictures. I just want to share a little bit about Levi and can you guys see that? Hopefully there's some pictures. So my husband and I, we always knew we wanted 3 kids. And when we found out that we were pregnant with our third and that it was a boy, we were so excited. And Levi came out, and he was truly just 100% boy. And he was so loved. I really want to show the pictures because I think that it's so important to see that he was just such an important part of our family. And this is my oldest daughter with him when he was a baby. She was supposed to be doing her homework. And then there's my middle daughter, Reese, and him. And by the third kid, I thought, I don't want any of these toys in my house. I have too much stuff. So poor Levi really was left to sort of fend for his all boy self with surrounded by all these girl things. But we just loved him so much. He was just really special, to our family. And every year we went to my husband's an anesthesiologist, and over a decade ago, we became really good friends with 5 other families that were all anesthesiologists. And we went to a beach trip every year. And this was our 7th year in this exact same house. And we started with 0 kids, and by this point, we're up to 17 kids, and the oldest were 9. And Levi really, he looked so forward. This was the first year that I think he really understood what this trip was all about. And he asked me every day for weeks leading up to it, Mom, we go to the beach soon. We go to the beach soon. We can't wait to go to the beach. And we really were so excited, about this week and how much we really look forward to it. This picture was at their the well child visit in April, just 6 weeks before he would drown. And this picture right here was taken on June 10th, just hours. He had, less than 12 hours left. And it's so crazy to think back and look on that, but he was wearing a life jacket. We really, truly took water safety seriously. And he was always wearing a life jacket or a puddle jumper every time we were around water. These were so every night sorry. So every, on the beach trip, one of the things that the kids and really everyone looked forward to the most was this crab hunting trip that the dads took the kids on. And they wore these matching shirts. All of the boys and the dads had these yellow shirts, and the girls all had fluorescent pink ones. And the night that Levi drowned, this was the shirt that he was wearing. A few more pictures, and I'll tell a little bit more about his story, but these were 3 pictures that I felt like really summed up Levi. He was crazy. He was all boy. He was always naked. He was always being silly and making us laugh. Water safety. I wouldn't even let them out of the house if we were at somewhere with a pool, out of the room without the puddle jumper on. And then just what he was, to our family and how important he was. So the night of June 10th, we were just waiting for it to get dark, basically, so the dads could take the kids crab hunting. And it was about 6:30. I'd already given Levi a bath. He was wearing khaki shorts. He was sitting on the couch, surrounded by friends. Both my husband and I were in the room. There were 10 adults in there. And I gave him a bowl of Cheetos. And then I saw a small plate of brownies, and I thought, oh, he would love a brownie. And they were very small because there were all of these kids. And so I just took this brownie, half of a brownie, gave him half, and put the other half in my mouth. And I don't know. I ruffled his hair, and I remember he was so excited about a surprise brownie. And I thought it was such just a special, sweet, innocent little interaction. And, of course, I had no idea that this would be my last interaction with Levi. And there is a small mercy in knowing that this last interaction was one of such tenderness. And my husband had just picked him up and held him upside down and said, how many crabs are we going to catch tonight? And Levi said, so many, Dad. But, he never even made it to the crab hunting experience. And these were our last interactions. And I turned around, and I have relived these next seconds over and over on repeat, for the last 11 months. And I don't know, what was I even doing? My phone wasn't over there on that side of the house. I wasn't drinking. I turned to close the Cheeto bag. I threw something away, and I walked out on the balcony. Actually, I didn't even know he was missing. And this was a little boy who was always attached to me. He was sitting on the couch in khaki shorts, surrounded by friends. And I walked out. I was just going to see if it was dark. I was like, oh, I wonder if it's dark enough yet. We're trying to go crab hunting. And walked out onto the balcony, other half of the brownie still in my mouth. It had truly been such a short amount of time. And just kind of out of instinct, looked over the edge of the balcony and just saw this bright spot of yellow. And of course, it was Levi in his crab hunting shirt. And I was just so confused for a split second. And I thought, but he's wearing khaki shorts. He already had a bath. We're not even swimming. Truly, that moment of confusion, that second of confusion, is what has fueled me for the last 11 months. And then I panicked and turned and banged on the glass, screaming. And then ran down the staircase, jumped in, pulled him out. And by the time we got him out, all 6 physicians were there, on the side of the pool. And my husband didn't know who it was until he flipped him over, because he was sitting on the couch. He was sitting on the couch. And when he flipped him over, and then, later I said, well, what did you do? And he said, I started performing CPR on him. And he was fully intubated. They tried so hard to save him. And, I think if he could have been saved, they would have been able to do it. They regained a pulse, and he was airlifted, but he died just hours later. And so much of it for me was that moment. There's so much to this story, obviously, to have to leave a vacation that you've been on for one day with your son's car seat still in the car. We stopped at Chick-fil-A on the way home because we still had 2 other kids, and I just automatically got 3 kids meals. And then I just was holding this milk. Like, what am I supposed to do with this? This is our life now. It was horrible. And that's what drowning really is. It's not a number. It's not a statistic. It's leaving the beach and going home without your son. And so I kept thinking back to this moment of confusion, you know, and why did I not really know that kids could drown, that my child would drown? And exactly a week later to the day that Levi died, my husband found the statistics on the CDC website, and, you know, the number one leading cause. And the real kicker for us was that non-swim time. Almost 70% of toddlers who drown in the non-swim time. And it was like my heart just broke all over again, you know, and I just thought, how had this been compiled and it didn't reach us? My husband's a cardiothoracic anesthesiologist. He's an airway expert. And, you know, we aren't perfect parents, but we have the best car seats and we researched everything. I still cut their grapes and my oldest is 10. I just wish I had given him a chance to save himself, or that I had really known what we were up against and had deadbolted the door, or, you know, really done anything. So I kept thinking about these statistics, and the only way I can describe it is I felt like he had been murdered and his murderer was still on the loose. And like, I had to stop him, because new babies were dying every day. It was summer when Levi died. It was June 10th. And so within a week, that exact same day that we found out the statistics, I sort of had this idea for, you know, a water guardian tag, which now I realize I had never heard of those ever. But I called this company. I Googled the first company I found, and I said, you know, can you help me make these waterproof tags? I think that a designated guardian would have helped in our situation. You know, my husband had just been sitting on the balcony 3 minutes before, and we came inside. It wasn't even like we stopped watching him. He was sitting on the couch. I was just cleaning up. But, and they said, you know, yes, we would love to help. And in fact, he connected me with the president of the American Lifeguard Association, who had also never heard of like a water watcher tag. And he said, yes, we'll endorse this. And, you know, this is a great idea. And so that's sort of how things started. And that was exactly one weekend. And within 3 weeks, I had Levi's Legacy, the website up, and the water guardian tags and everything. And it all happened very, very quickly. But even when I was looking at the back of the tag at the beginning of July, it hadn't even been 1 full month yet. And I just kept thinking, why was I so confused when I saw him in the water? And we had, there were, like I said, 5 other families there. And it was 6 physicians. And then each of the moms, each of us is on our second or third kid. And we live in 6 different states. And it's Florida, Louisiana, Georgia, South Carolina, Illinois, and Tennessee. And when I was overlooking the balcony, I was standing on the balcony overlooking 2 pools and a beach, and I turned screaming and banged on the glass. Every single person, every adult later in the room told me, we thought someone had fallen down the stairs. And drowning doesn't happen, you know, to real kids. I mean, this is, I guess, what we thought. I mean, it was such an afterthought, even for these airway experts and these moms, you know, who live who were not, you know, had a 10-year-old and had been to all these things that we worry about as parents, and nobody thought that, you know, drowning was that. And so that just really kept fueling me. And I kept thinking, the water guardian tags, okay, this is great. This is one thing that maybe could have helped, but what is the real problem? Like, why was I so confused when I saw Levi in the water? And it was a lack of awareness. And that's sort of what led me. I was standing in my kitchen and I just thought, lack of awareness. How do I reach parents? How do I reach parents? And I can't explain this desperation. It wasn't even me. Like, it was something beyond me that just was fueling me forward, because I thought, like, this cannot happen again to somebody else's child. And I realized how to reach parents, pediatricians. And for a second I thought, I need to call our pediatrician, because he's amazing. I mean, he's truly the best of the best. And then I realized, wait a minute, if he's not talking about it, then I bet most pediatricians aren't, because he's really wonderful. And I also realized my husband, as I said, is an anesthesiologist, and he belongs to the American Society of Anesthesiologists. So I knew that the national really sets the priorities for the local. And I thought, I have to reach the AAP somehow. And so, of course, it's a long story, but I wrote just a public plea. And I mean, I don't even know, looking back, it had not even been a full month since Levi drowned when I wrote this, and just really poured so much of my grief, into it. And then I had become connected with Morgan Miller and Bodie a few weeks before, because we lost our babies on the same day. And I don't even know how, through some gift from the universe, one of my friends knew one of her friends who knew her, and we were able to be connected. And so we had been talking quite a bit before that. And I'd even asked her, I said, did your pediatrician ever talk about this? Did you really know the statistics? And she said, no, we live in California, and I had no idea. And so I just told her, well, I'm working on something, I'll let you know. And when the article, the letter that I wrote to the AAP was published, I just sent it. I said, oh, here is that thing that I was working on. And it really just resonated with them too, because it is, they just didn't know about drowning and how quickly it could happen. And so they shared it on their social media. And then it just, since then, became just this joint shared mission of course, not wanting this to happen to other children. And also, we wish we had known, it isn't a guarantee that Levi or Emmy or any child who's been lost to drowning would still be here. But my husband and I were both in the room. Levi's death rests on us. There's no way around it. We are not placing blame, but I just think, what if we had known what we were up against, and had deadbolted the door or put him in swim lessons or had done anything, besides, he had nothing, no protection. And I have to say that this opportunity to work with the AAP, has just been really incredible. And so, of course, I hate it. Of course, I hate the reason. I wish this wasn't me. I wish this wasn't me, but they have been so kind. The executive director from Arkansas, Amy Ollinghouse, was the first one to reach out. And then immediately after that, the devotion and advocacy and passion that the AAP and all of its members and all of the pediatricians have for kids, they have proven definitely within the last year with all of the changes and things. And when we were speaking at the annual leadership forum in March, I wasn't nervous. We knew that, this was our chance, and we really wanted to be compelling. And looking back on it, I don't know how I managed to do that without even being nervous. And I know that the whole time I was speaking, it was beyond just me, and it was beyond Levi. It was like every single child and baby and toddler and teenager who has been lost to drowning was in that room with us. I know it sounds dumb, but there's really no other way to explain it. And they were just rooting us on. And I think that the fact that the changes happened so quickly, not only is a testament to the AAP and their belief in this and their commitment, but also just to the magnitude of the epidemic, that it is so many kids and that it's happening so often. And I am really grateful. And I think that what I hope with the AAP's involvement is that we can reach more parents, because even now I know that as someone who now has put so much of my life into this, it is so disheartening then to read a story in the news and I think, but how did they not know? How did they not know? Because now I'm in this, water safety world, this drowning prevention world, I guess. But I had no idea about any of this. I didn't know there were any nonprofits or that there was a water safety day. This is all new. And I think that this chance to sort of break out of the sort of echo chamber maybe is really hopeful and really exciting, and just acknowledging that stigma. I'll just say one final thing. I think it really sums it up. My husband, who's a lot more insightful and gets his point across more quickly than I do, but he said, drowning, there's all this implication of neglect. There is it's almost like a punishment. Well, they should have been watching their kid. That's what they get. Or why would that teenager jump off the cliff? That was dumb. That's what they get. And this is the reality of what our culture perceives as drowning. And it's because it's so easy. We're so many things we're worried about as parents that if we can find the loophole for one thing and say, oh, well, good, drowning, let's cross that off the list. My kids aren't going to drown. I get it. That's, I think, what I must have done subconsciously. And, but, you know, my husband said, drowning doesn't happen to the parents. It happens to the child. And I think that if we can all get behind that as a culture, remove this stigma, remove this idea that this was punishment for the parents, and realize that it's the child. Like, Levi will never get to trick or treat. He will never get to go to kindergarten. You know, when he was in the water, did he wonder where I was? I mean, this is the reality of what drowning really is. And I think that the more we can sort of not tiptoe around it, and just really face it full on, and help parents and caretakers and just our community as a whole to realize that drowning happens to real kids, and it happens quickly, and it's preventable. There is a lot of hope, I think, in the AAP being involved with this. And I just really believe in the power of the medical community. So thank you for, that's my part. I feel like it's hard to listen, and it takes a lot of courage and to even listen to this. So I really appreciate everyone who's involved. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole, for sharing your advocacy work and sharing Levi's story. What you've done after Levi's death has just been incredible. And I do apologize for the echo earlier. Hopefully that's been alleviated now. It's now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Julie Gilchrist, who helped write AAP's revised statement on the prevention of drowning. Dr. Gilchrist recently retired after more than 20 years at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's Injury Center. In that time, she was responsible for research and programs to prevent leading causes of childhood injury and death. Drowning prevention is her passion. She continues to work in the area, co-authoring chapters and articles on the topic, including the new policy statement from the American Academy of Pediatrics on drowning prevention. She's completed degrees in human physiology and sports medicine at Rice University, and her medical doctorate degree at UT Southwestern Medical School, and a pediatrics residency at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia before joining the CDC in 1997. Dr. Gilchrist, thank you for being here, and thank you for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me, Adam. I got to say, it's very challenging to follow that story. Nicole just laid it out so beautifully, what the difficulties are and what we've been battling against for so many decades is the awareness that the thing that's most fun in your backyard is also the thing most likely to kill your toddler and preschool child. And so I've always been delighted. I've been involved in the last two AAP policy statements. We were really pushed to update earlier than we might have, but there was new research that needed to get out there. It is an opportunity for press and action and increased awareness anytime a new statement comes out. So I was delighted to have that opportunity. I am going to go through it real quickly. Let me see if I can share some slides with you. This one. All right, share. So this is just a rundown of the statement. Most of you, obviously, if you're part of NDPA, you recognize that drowning is a problem. But I just thought, since we have this time, I don't know how to advance my slide. There we go. So always, I like to define drowning. A lot of people think that there is no such thing as non-fatal drowning, that drowning is a fatal event, but it's not. It's submersion or immersion in a liquid. It's a process that can be interrupted in a non-fatal way or can be completed, which causes a fatality. It is a hypoxic brain injury. So people don't always think of drowning that way. So since it's a brain injury, if you survive, oftentimes you're left with deficits. Unlike some other injuries that you can fully recover from, and some people do recover from non-fatal drowning, but there is always the potential for a lack of full recovery, changes in personality, mood, activities of daily living, all those things. So drowning does have the potential for fatal and non-fatal outcomes, and this makes it in line with all other injury causes. And the basic statistics in the policy statements are ones I'm sure you're familiar with. 1 to 4-year-olds, this is the leading cause of injury death. And that doesn't quite capture it. I'm going to describe it a little bit more in detail. But in 15 to 19-year-olds, it's now the third leading cause of unintentional injury death, because poisoning in our teenagers has moved up to second place, bumping drowning down to third. And that's not because we're getting better with drowning in our teenagers. It's because poisoning has gotten so much worse with the opioid epidemic. In 2017, almost 1,000 children 0 to 19 died of drowning. So it continues to be a large public health burden. So this is what I wanted to present for the 0 to 4-year-olds. So we always say it's the leading cause of injury death, but if you don't know that injury is an enormous problem in children, then you don't recognize what that means to be the leading cause of injury death. So if you compare it to other causes of childhood death, it is second only to birth defects. So if your child does not have a birth defect, then drowning is the most likely thing to get them. And it's above cancer, homicide, auto crashes, and all the other things that we go crazy about in protecting our children from. It's above all of those. Trends since 1979, it's been coming down nicely. We're about 70% of the drowning rates that we used to have, but you can see over the last decade, it's fairly flat. Statistically, it's still trending down, but we are not making significant gains, particularly among males. So as you can see, the females are the line on the bottom. It might be pink or red to you. Males are the line on the top that's blue, and the total or combined line is in between. And about, depending on the year, somewhere between 75 and 80% of all drowning victims are male. This is a predominantly male problem. Even in our children, anybody over 1. Our highest risk groups that we lay out in the new policy statement are similar to previous statements. White males 0 to 4 years, and this is predominantly because of access to residential backyard pools or ponds or things in their environment. American Indian, Alaska Native children, both boys and girls, 0 to 4-year-olds, and Black adolescents 15 to 19. And this is likely primarily due to the lack of exposure when they're very young, and then they encounter difficulties when they're older and don't have the ability to deal with them. Non-fatal drowning is also a large problem. In 2017, almost 8,700 children were seen in emergency departments for non-fatal drowning. The percentage that ended up needing hospitalization or transfer for further care actually came down. It used to be closer to 50%. It's now about 25%. I think that might have to do with some of the concerns about delayed drowning and dry drowning and some of the other things that made the media that might encourage parents to seek care, even though their child is not terribly symptomatic. But in any case, still 25% of those seen in the ED were hospitalized or transferred for further care. That is a huge number. In all unintentional injury in childhood, it's about 6% that get hospitalized. And so for drowning, for 25%, down from 50%, this is a proxy for the severity of the injury. This is a global hypoxic brain injury, and it has the potential to be very devastating. And the very saddest part of that is that studies show that in-hospital care do not significantly change the outcomes. You still want to do things because sometimes patients do improve, but for the most part, when a patient comes in and hits the ED doors, they are assessed. There are a number of really good assessments, and it will tell you what the likelihood of their outcome is. And the things that we do in hospital do not significantly change that. It is a global hypoxic brain injury, and it is very severe. If you've heard of the injury pyramid, this gives you an idea of severity as well. This is a pyramid for all unintentional injuries. It shows you that there were about 111,000 deaths, 1.6 million hospitalizations, 25 million ED visits, and about 117 million outpatient visits. So this gives you an idea of the severity, how peaked the pyramid is. It can give you an idea of the severity because for every death you can say there are a certain number of hospitalizations and even more ED visits and even more outpatient visits. And so it is kind of a proxy for severity, and each different kind of injury has its own type of pyramid. And I just wanted to share with you the drowning pyramid. It is inverted. There are more deaths than there are hospitalizations. There are more hospitalizations This is older data, not taking into account the 25%, the decrease to 25% hospitalization, but previously there were more hospitalizations than ED visits. There are no outpatient visits for drowning. You don't wait and say, well, I'll go to my doctor next week because I think I drowned. So that doesn't happen. So anyway, it is the only unintentional injury or injury of any sort that I'm aware of that has an inverted pyramid. And this is important because it reinforces that this is a very severe injury and prevention is key. There is not a lot that we can do once somebody gets medical care to change the outcomes. We must prevent it up front. If you aren't able to prevent it up front, then bystander CPR is the only thing that has been shown to drastically change outcomes. So the updated policy statement covered a few areas that had new research, at-risk populations, racial and ethnic disparities, the concept of water competency, which has become a big issue internationally and in the US, supervision and life jackets, barriers and swim skill, and the chain of survival, including bystander CPR. So I just want to touch briefly on these. These were the new research that was available that's covered in the policy statement. So at-risk populations, of course, includes toddler and preschool, especially 12 to 36 months. That is our high-risk group. It includes all of the things that they can get in, anything that has water that's in their environment, bathtubs, residential pools, any kind of container, any type of pond, anything that they have access to is a potential, that has water in it, or any kind of liquid in it is a potential drowning. Their biggest problem, for the most part, is unexpected access. Times when they ended up in the water when they weren't expected to be there. And that is why barriers, for this age group, we really focus on barriers. And that needs to be continued. People don't expect that the water feature or pool that's in their backyard that is so beautiful and so much fun is a big problem for toddlers and preschool children. And as Nicole pointed out, it's the best parents with the closest supervision who've done everything right that without barriers, kids get out of your sight. They do it every day. And it's tragic when just that tiny little lapse, that absolutely normal, absolutely expected tiny little lapse in supervision without barriers cost the child their life. And that's why we really push for barriers. Door locks, door alarms, pool fencing are the ones that are most likely to slow the child down to where you can find them before they end up in the water and reestablish supervision. The other big group, adolescents 15 to 19 years, 75% of adolescent drowning is in natural water. And adolescents, I think, make up about half of all natural water drownings. So this is the big problem. It's typically they're out roaming the community. There might be ponds or lakes or rivers, canals, or something in their environment, and they get in over their head literally and are unable to deal with it. Oftentimes there's high-risk situations. They might be jumping off of rocks or diving in or in areas that have underwater obstacles or currents or things that they don't know how to deal with. There's oftentimes impulsiveness. A group of friends says, hey, we'll swim to the island, and the one that is the weaker swimmer isn't going to go, hey guys, this might not be a great idea. I'm not that great a swimmer. Of course they go because it's their friends. And there might be alcohol involved. Oftentimes there is. 30 to 70% of adolescent and adult drownings involve alcohol use. For this group, we really like to focus on water competency, and that's more than just swim skill. That's understanding the risks of the environment, because just because you can swim in a swimming pool does not mean that you understand everything in a natural water environment and can stay safe. So water competency is well beyond just basic swim skill, which I'll cover later. It also covers being aware of the risks of the environment, being able to recognize a swimmer that might be in distress or having difficulty, knowing what to do, how to rescue them, perform CPR, and call for help. These are all aspects of water competency. Other at-risk populations highlighted in the policy statement are high-risk medical conditions. We know that epilepsy it puts you at high risk of drowning. Autism, particularly for those that are more mentally involved or tend to wander, kids under 15, particularly with autism, are at high risk of drowning, and kids that may have diagnosed or undiagnosed cardiac arrhythmias. Unfortunately, that puts them at risk for drowning. There is something about being immersed in water that can alter your cardiac rhythms if you're at risk for cardiac arrhythmias. focus on, in these groups, obviously we focus on supervision. If you have epilepsy, you're asked not to bathe in a bathtub, and certainly should have one-on-one type eyes-on supervision if you're in a swimming pool. For autism, obviously barriers are also going to play a huge role, because just like toddlers, autistic children that tend to wander can get away from, the basic supervision very, very easily at, very little fault of the parents. It's just, it happens. If you pee, your child, unless you take them with you, your child is going to be out of your sight for a moment. Activities of daily living that adults do put us at risk for who need supervision, and that's why barriers are so important. Sociodemographic risk factors that are highlighted. There are religious groups that have difficulty learning to swim because of the need for more modest clothing or single-sex swim classes. Different cultures, particularly African American culture, that tends to not be as excited about learning to swim. Their traditions, socioeconomics, obviously, if you have difficulty affording the series of lessons or the transportation to get there, or don't have things access in your neighborhood, that makes it difficult as well. For these groups, obviously, we focus on educating parents of the need for this life-saving skill, trying to create accommodations for those who have barriers to learning to swim, and including water competency. Even for parents, water competency doesn't mean you have to know how to swim. If you understand the risks and what to do in a situation, you can improve your water competency even without knowing how to swim. So racial and ethnic disparities. This was a paper that we put out a few years ago that really highlights that increased risk among whites 0 to 4, because this is age in years across the bottom axis from 0 to 29 years, and a rate per thousand population of drowning, all fatal unintentional drownings. And you can see for the white 0 to 4-year-olds, there's that very large peak between 1 and 2 in our white toddlers and preschoolers. Our African American peers are the blue line. They have less risk of drowning in the toddler and preschool age group, typically because of less exposure to residential backyard pools. But because of that less exposure to residential backyard pools, they also don't get the experience of learning to swim as early. And then you see that very large disparity from 5 to 18, that enormous group that is at risk for drowning because of the lack of basic swim skills and water competency. And these are all drownings in all combined in different settings, so pools, natural water, everything here. I was very interested in what it might look like for swimming pools, because swimming pools typically are one of the safer places to swim. You know where the bottom is, you know where the sides are, the water hopefully is fairly clear, there's no current, there are no underwater obstacles, hopefully. Things that might put a weaker swimmer at risk, one would hope they could manage with very basic swim skills in a swimming pool. When you look at, these are fatal swimming pool drowning rates by race ethnicity, from the same paper, it shows that we still have an enormous disparity between our African American and our white children's age groups. In fact, I think it's about a 10% from the 11 to 12. I think it's 10 times, not 10%, 10 times the drowning rates in those groups. And that's just frightening, frankly. So I did want to talk a little bit about the concept of water competency, which is a big thing. So this is so much more than swim lessons and swim skills. This is water safety awareness, which includes understanding the risks in your community, in your area. Do you have rip currents? Do you have currents in a river? Are there safer places to swim? Are there lifeguarded areas? Things like that. The basic swim skills that we encourage are being able to enter the water, surface, turn around in 360 degrees to survey your area, propel oneself at least 25 yards in some way, shape, or form or fashion. It doesn't have to be pretty and it doesn't have to be a recognized stroke, but just being able to propel oneself. Float on, which is a big thing for me, or tread water so that you can rest, particularly if you're in surf, and then being able to exit the water. So these are what's considered basic swim skills. that studies have shown in countries like Bangladesh can drastically reduce drowning risks for the basic risks to children. So this isn't going to help with high-risk situations and alcohol use in adolescents necessarily, some of the really, frankly, crazy and stupid things that teens do, but as far as childhood things, those 1 to 4, 5 to 9, 10 to 14 before they get really crazy, these basic swim skills can help, particularly for the swimming pool. If you can do these things, you can swim more safely in a swimming pool. And the last thing in water competency is being able to recognize and respond to a distressed swimmer. And this includes knowing how to conduct a safe rescue without putting yourself at risk, that you can put something that floats out there that they can grab onto, that you don't have to go in the water to save someone, because so often that ends up in a dual drowning or a would-be rescuer who ends up drowning. And then finally, bystander CPR, which is one of the only medical treatments that's been shown to improve outcomes. So the evidence-based strategies that we have, that we encourage everyone to focus on, and I always break it down by the risk groups, and Nicole pointed this out, that yes, children are at risk when they're in the water, and that's where supervision, like lifeguarding, but not only lifeguarding, because parents need to watch their kids even in the presence of a lifeguard. So supervision that is close, constant, and attentive, and things like life jackets or other approved flotation devices like puddle jumpers are so key. But then there's when they aren't expected to be in the water, and I think this is where we miss a lot of people. They know that when their kids are in the water, they should watch them. How well they do it, I'm not sure people know, and I'm also concerned that parents may not know what drowning looks like. And so it may have to be far along the process before somebody recognizes that there's a problem. Drowning happens very quickly, very quietly. There is no splashing. There's no calling out for the most part when you have moved along that process. And so I think that's part of the education for parents, is to know what to look for. But then also to know that when they aren't expected to be in the water, supervision is absolutely not an adequate strategy to prevent drowning, because kids can and do always, every day, elude your supervision at some point. And so that's where barriers, multiple layers of protection, door locks, door alarms, pool fencing, or fencing to prevent them from accessing whatever water hazards are in their environment, is absolutely necessary, especially for the small children, because there is absolutely no way that we can expect a parent to watch their child closely enough to prevent them from getting in the water. It is just not humanly possible, and there should be no blame except on us to letting them know that barriers are so necessary. And then finally, I put in preparation. So there are things that, swim skill, obviously you want to have it before you get in the water, but it takes some time to develop it. So you're at risk while you're developing your swim skill, but also CPR training. And CPR training should be included in schools. I have personal stories of a child who was 7 years old who saved his 18-month-old drowning sister, who he described as blue and still and eyes rolled back and no heartbeat. And he was able to do CPR well enough because he watched Rescue 911. That was his favorite show on TV, and this dates me because the show is very, very old. But that was his favorite show, and they showed at the beginning of the show in the early, like when the credits are running, paramedics doing CPR correctly. And he did that. He pinched her nose and he blew in her mouth and he pounded on her chest in a way that was sufficient enough that she left the hospital without noticeable neurologic defects. And that was pretty amazing. So I think that even young children should be trained in CPR. So the charge to pediatricians, obviously education of their families. This is so difficult though, because the parents come in, many parents come in, they're more concerned about what somebody's eating or whether they're pooping or if they have a rash or if they have an ear infection or if they're not sleeping well, or what to do about behavior problems. These are the things that parents routinely bring up as their questions. And so trying to find time to say, hey, we need to talk a little bit about water safety is very difficult in a very busy pediatric practice. And it's such a challenge, but obviously we need to do better. But this is where maybe we can partner. and help get the word out and make sure that they have the resources that they need. Maybe the pediatrician isn't the one that has the conversation. Maybe there's a nurse or somebody else in the office that can do it. But that's very difficult. Advocacy is helping with community programs to make sure that there's swim lessons available, helping with policies at the school for CPR, or policies that might mandate backyard fencing for swimming pools or things like that. These are the places where pediatricians are encouraged to jump in and focus on the evidence-based strategies that we know work. Barriers, supervision, including lifeguarding, life jackets, swim skill, and all the way through water competency and bystander CPR. And this is where you guys come in. We encourage pediatricians to partner with community groups and try and find ways to promote the programs that are in your community that might help with these at-risk children, to find out which children are at risk. If you diagnose somebody with epilepsy or autism or cardiac arrhythmias, this is part of the conversation that the parents need to know, that their children are at increased risk of drowning. And so I kind of wanted to stop right there and see what questions we might have, or I know the whole policy statement is geared toward pediatricians, but I'm hoping that there'll be things in there that you guys can use to make a difference in your community. So I'm going to stop there.
Thanks, Julie. We're going to get to some questions here in a few minutes. Before we get to our question and answer session, and I encourage any participants today in the webinar to use the question and answer function down at the bottom. And we will get to as many questions here shortly as possible. Before we get to questions, I want to turn this over to Helene Holstein with the American Academy of Pediatrics, who is briefly going to discuss next week's Drowning Prevention Day of Action and how we can all get involved in social media. Helene Holstein is the social media community manager at the American Academy of Pediatrics. In this role, Helene develops, maintains, and monitors and analyzes AAP and HealthyChildren's.org social media presence. Helene also works with AAP's active network of engaged pediatricians on social media, also known as the Tweeticians. Helene, we'll turn it over to you.
Hi, thanks, Adam. Thank you for hosting this webinar, and thank you, Nicole, for sharing your story, your family and Levi's story. Your advocacy with the Millers has made such an impact, and it will save children's lives. So again, thank you. So I'm going to give a brief overview of resources available from the Academy to share not only next week, but throughout the year about water safety and drowning prevention, as well as some information on a social media storm the Academy is hosting next week about drowning prevention. So I'm going to share some slides. Okay. So I think the slides are up. Okay. So we have, the AAP has an online drowning prevention toolkit. It's a really easy URL, aap.org/drowning. This includes resources that you can use on and offline for drowning prevention awareness. It includes social media graphics that are available in both English and Spanish for Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. It includes web pages that can be shared for parents, as well as information from the Academy. And it also includes infographics you can print out for bulletin boards and any type of offices or something like that to share. The Drowning Prevention Toolkit has content for inside and outside the home. It has it for during swim time and non-swim time, as well as different age groups. Another resource available from the Academy is our public service announcement collection. This includes 15, 30, and 60-second PSAs with Nicole, as well as Morgan Miller and Bodie Miller, telling their stories and giving information about drowning prevention. And it also includes 2 videos that are a little bit longer but have great content. There's a mom-to-mom discussion, as well as a parent-to-pediatrician discussion with AAP member Dr. Zinn Hoffman. So these are 2 URLs. Adam has them, and we'll be able to share them later on. But aap.org/drowning and the BitOL right there, great resources to share. And then happening next week is the May 23rd Drowning Prevention Day of Action. So May 23rd is right before Memorial Day, and we are coordinating, AP is coordinating a social media storm to share ways we can keep children safe in the summer and all year round. So AP with partner organizations will be joining a social media storm to spark conversations and spur communities to take action to protect children with drowning prevention. So between 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. Eastern on May 23rd, we're encouraging people to join the Academy, other pediatricians, as well as parents and professional organizations, in sharing information how to prevent drowning. We are asking people to use the hashtag drowning prevention, and by concentrating our efforts on this one day, we can maximize the impact of this drowning prevention message. So things that you can do during this storm. We're asking people to post messages. There is sample social media available at aap.org/drowning prevention, on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Pinterest, so we can reach many different audiences on the many different platforms. And then we're asking people to share their own drowning prevention stories by taking either a video or sharing personal photos. Sharing these stories about how children drown can help illustrate to other parents how real the risk is. And during the storm, AAP will be monitoring and sharing posts. So please be sure to tag the post with the hashtag drowning prevention, or by tagging AAP social media accounts, which I have available in the next slide. So below is AAP's Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter account. And if you have any questions about the Day of Action or about the drowning prevention resources available, please email me or my colleague Susan Stephen Martins at the Academy, and we would love to work with you. I guess with that, are there any questions?
Excellent. Thank you, Helene, for sharing that, and hopefully we can all become engaged in the AAP social media campaign next week. So to end the webinar, I'd like to have all of our panelists rejoin us, including Nicole and Dr. Gilchrist. We have seen a couple questions come through that I think we have some time to get to. The first one is I've seen a number of requests come in to see if Nicole and Dr. Gilchrist could share some of their resources, including Nicole, your letter, and Dr. Gilchrist, some of the PowerPoint slides and data that was shown. So if that's possible, we'll distribute that out to some of the attendees afterwards. One of the first questions that I've seen come up throughout our chat today, which I'll pose to Dr. Gilchrist and then open this up to the rest of the panel. I know, Dr. Gilchrist, you discussed the water competency piece with AEP's statement. There were some questions that came up discussing that 1 to 4 age range and what the AEP suggests for this age range as far as skill set and swimming lessons, and then I'll ask a follow-up question to that.
Well, yeah, you're right. Water competency is a process. You're not going to take a 1-year-old, you know, to the time that they're 2-year-old and be able to impart everything to be able to say that they're water competent. No, this is a long process that it takes through years to understand your risks around you. I mean, obviously little kids are not going to understand the risks of the water, or, you know, when you tell them things about rip currents or currents in a river or underwater obstacles, I mean, they're not going to get all that. So they're starting with basic skills. But that's the thing, is we want people to realize that once you achieve basic skills, and even if you know all your strokes, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're water competent. That includes understanding and having an awareness of the risks in your environment, and then also what to do, how to recognize when somebody's in difficulty, what to do at that point, basic CPR. So it's a lot. It's and there's no one class that's going to be able to capture it all, particularly for the very young.
And as a follow-up to that, Dr. Gilchrist, I haven't seen this come in our questions today, but I mentioned this to you the other day when we were talking. Some of our NDPA members have questioned why the AAP set the start age for swim lessons at 1-year-old versus maybe 6 months. Could you explain that?
Yeah, well, there are concerns. Okay, first and foremost, the AAP relies very heavily on research to set policy statements. There is absolutely no published research that shows a benefit to kids under 1 for the infant swim lessons, and there is very significant potential risk, which include things like hyponatremia, which is when you swallow too much water, it can cause brain swelling and seizures and death. Hypothermia, which babies, if they're not in appropriate temperatures, drop their body temperature, which it causes all kinds of health problems. There might be risks to respiratory epithelium from exposure to chemicals in the early babies. That's still kind of out there. We don't know exactly which way. They're both at risk of giving and contracting recreational water illnesses. You know, so from not being potty trained, there are mental health concerns for some of these programs that dunk babies and that they're crying and, you know, then fearful of the water. So obviously there are programs out there that are teaching very young children and doing a very good job of it. I know several people who are involved with NDPA who teach very young children in a positive, supportive, stepwise fashion, which is probably great, but we just don't have the research around that. And we do know that there are some very significant risks, potential risks. Does that mean your child should not be in the water before 12 months? Of course not. If you want to do the mommy and me, or if you find some positive swim experience, just realize that, I mean, we just need to know that you're not drown proofing, and that parents shouldn't rely on that as their primary intervention. That these are early water experiences that may or may not have any benefit to your child. And so, you know, we don't necessarily discourage those types of experiences, but if you're doing something to learn skills, particularly being able to raise your head and breathe, young babies, yes, they might be able to turn over and float, which is great, but what does it take what risks are we putting them at to get them to be able to do that? Whereas barriers, door locks, door alarms, and other things might perform the same safety function without the potential negative risks. So until there's research to suggest that it's beneficial and outweigh the risks in those under 1, that's the AAP's stance. Is that helpful?
Yeah, thank you very much. Actually, Dr. Tim Flood is joining us in the audience, and I believe you've worked with Dr. Flood before. And he posed a similar question on whether there was enough evidence-based research promoting teaching early infant swim skills, or if we need additional research to that age range. So I think you answered that question as well. And we only have a few minutes left, so I don't think we're going to be able to get to all of the questions that have been submitted. Yeah, Nicole, go ahead.
Really quickly, I'm so sorry. I feel like as the parent on this who has lost a child to drowning because he thought water was fun, I'm very aware, you know, through the months of working with the AAP, that the evidence base, and my husband's a physician, so I mean, he is so science minded. I promise I understand, you know, the need for evidence. But I mean, it is, I'm sitting here sweating because I wish Levi was scared of the water. I mean, and I know, you know, we can't escape water. It's everywhere. Our daughters were swimming on June 11th. I mean, it was horrible, but they wanted to swim. So we were like, okay, let's swim. And I just think that I would be remiss if I didn't add this little part in, just speaking, not for everybody, but just as a representative, I think of some parents who have lost a child, specifically a toddler, that I know Levi wasn't scared of the water. And I know that we can't just, there are different, you know, as a teacher, I know that every child learns things differently and that everything has to be a process. But I do think that with the numbers being so high for ages 1 to 4, that there does seem like maybe more of an, not aggressive approach, but I mean, is there a chance to do more evidence, to do more research? And of course, nobody wants to be in the control group. I get that. Nobody wants to say, let's see how long, you know, if my child can learn this. And, but for us, for me, and for the Millers, and I know there's so many more people, it's not just us, but our child, we were at home when they drowned. So to put something in, like, I couldn't put in a fence. And I know there's so much evidence around the fence. I wish it had a 4-sided fence, but it didn't. So the ability to save himself would have been something that he could have brought, you know, with him. And I'm not, you know, I don't want to seem disrespectful. I know the evidence is so important, but is there a plan to do more research?
It's difficult. Drowning is actually quite difficult to study because as common as it is and as horrible as it is, it's scientifically a rare event. And so it makes it very, very difficult, particularly in the kids under 1. That's why we know that it's helpful in kids 1 to 4, but we can't break it down by 1, 2, 3 by year. They have to be clumped. And it is hard. With enough money and support, we could probably design something. But the difficulty is, and the balance is, I know you said you'd rather him be fearful of water, but as somebody who's taught people to swim, and one of the things that I took on was children who were fearful. So older children, 8, 9, 10-year-old kids who were terrified of the water was one of the groups that I would take on and try and independently, we'd one-on-one work through it. I mean, that's a horrible situation. And so I'm not saying that all of these classes would lead to that, but there is a balance that you want to make them cautious without making them so terrified that they ultimately can't gain the skills that they need to survive. Like what happens if they're in a flood or they drive their car into a lake or that's the thing. Avoidance of water is not a good way to approach drowning prevention either. So it's a balance, and it's very, very difficult. And that's why we say it doesn't mean don't be in the water with your child, but you just have to recognize that you want to have a safe experience that's a positive experience where your child is learning skills. Obviously, I think floating, that should be the first skill that every swimmer, even an adult swimmer, learns. You should learn to float first. I don't understand why the first thing they teach you to do is put your face in the water. Float first so that you know how to breathe. So I think that's one of the changes that we need to make, where there's a focus on floating for our children, because then they can rest, they can cry out, they have an opportunity to be caught. But it's just, how do you do it? When do you do it? That's the concern. And since we have the science from 1 to 4, we're going with that. But that doesn't mean that there aren't programs that can be developed for younger children that meet the criteria. And obviously, you want to get them before they're toddling. Most children start to walk between 10 months and 12 months. And so that's when you want to, and they're older then, so they regulate their temperature better. They're less likely to swallow water. The older you can get them, the closer you can get them to 1, the less those other concerns, the less impact those other concerns are likely to have.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.
No, I love your enthusiasm, and I love where you're going, and I would love to continue to work with you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
So I know we've had a number of questions submitted, but we are at our time for today, so this will bring us to a close. I'd like to thank each of the panelists for joining us today for our fantastic discussion. I know we could probably go on all day discussing this, but thank you for joining us today. We invite each of you joining us today to join us for our next webinar, which will be Wednesday, June 5th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. That discussion will focus on disabilities and autism as it relates to swimming and water safety. Our partners at Swim Angelfish will be joining us. Don't forget, you can also submit presentations for the 2020 National Water Safety Conference that will be held in Fort Worth next April. You can go to ndpaconference.org and scroll down on the page and you'll find the submission link for the conference. Again, ladies, thank you for joining us today, and thank you for joining us at home, and we hope to see you again on our next webinar. Happy International Water Safety Day, everyone.
Adam, I'll provide you with a PDF of my slides that you can circulate. Feel free.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Gilchrist.